It was one of those late summer afternoons when the sky seemed to paint itself in shades of gold and copper, a time of day that always reminded Daniel of how quickly life could change, how fleeting the beauty of a moment could be if you weren't paying attention. But Daniel rarely had time to notice the little details of the world around him anymore because being a single dad meant his focus was almost always consumed by survival, by making sure his little girl, Lily, had enough to eat, clothes that fit her growing body, and the sense of safety she needed to believe that their world was still intact even after her mother had walked out on them 2 years earlier, chasing dreams of fame and fortune while leaving Daniel with nothing but unpaid bills, a crumbling farmhouse on the edge of town, and a daughter who asked too many questions about why mommy wasn't coming back. But Daniel, despite the heartbreak and the endless weight on his shoulders, never let bitterness seep into his voice. Whenever Lily was near, because she deserved love, laughter, and stability, not the heavy bitterness of adult disappointments, so he worked hard at the local auto repair shop, took odd jobs repairing tractors for farmers, and when the shop wasn't busy, he poured his time into tinkering with old engines, creating small miracles out of rust and grease, because fixing things was what he knew best, and maybe, just maybe, fixing things was what kept his own heart from falling apart completely. And on that fateful day, as the heat of the sun started to soften into a cooler breeze, Daniel found himself sitting on the porch steps of their farmhouse sipping black coffee out of a chipped mug, watching Lily chase butterflies across the yard with a laugh so pure it made him forget every unpaid bill on the kitchen counter, when suddenly in the distance came the sound of a motorbike sputtering, coughing, and then dying out completely on the gravel road that cut across the edge of their land, and Daniel, by instinct more than curiosity, set his mug down and stood, wiping his calloused hands on his jeans, because when you've been fixing machines for most of your life, you know the cry of a broken engine like you know your own heartbeat, and sure enough, just 100 yards down the road stood a woman in a leather jacket and helmet, her motorbike tilted awkwardly as she tried and failed to kick it back to life, her body language a mixture of frustration and determination, and Daniel, despite himself, felt a flicker of something. A curiosity, a pull he couldn't explain, so he called out across the yard, his deep voice carrying over the evening air, "Looks like she's giving you trouble," and the woman turned, startled, her helmet visor lifting to reveal a face he wasn't prepared for, a face that seemed carved out of light itself, with eyes sharp yet weary, the kind of beauty that wasn't just surface level but carried the weight of secrets untold, and she smiled faintly, embarrassed, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as she said, "Yeah, I think she's done for. I don't suppose you know anything about engines," to which Daniel almost chuckled because knowing engines was the one thing he knew better than most men in town, but instead of boasting, he simply walked toward her, his boots crunching against the gravel as Lily came running up behind him, curious as ever, her small hand clutching his, and together they approached the stranded stranger, who crouched beside her bike as though hoping it would magically roar back to life, and Daniel knelt down, gave the machine a once-over with experienced eyes, and said, "Carburetor's flooded, maybe fuel line too, you've been pushing her too hard," and the woman looked at him as though he'd just read her diary, surprised and a little impressed, so she asked softly, "Can you fix it?" And Daniel, brushing dust from his hands, simply replied, "I can try," because fixing things wasn't just his trade, it was his way of giving people hope when they thought something was beyond repair. So while Lily crouched nearby, curiously watching his every move, Daniel pulled a few tools from the side pouch he kept in the barn, worked the bolts loose, checked the spark plugs, cleaned the carburetor, adjusted the line, and with every twist of his wrist, the woman's eyes seemed to soften, as if she wasn't just watching a man repair a machine, but a man who poured his soul into the act of mending what was broken. And when at last Daniel stood, wiped sweat from his brow, and nodded for her to try again, the woman swung her leg over the bike, turned the ignition, and the machine roared back to life with a growl that echoed down the road, startling birds from the nearby trees, and she laughed. Oh, how she laughed. A sound both relieved and radiant, a sound that made Daniel's chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years, and Lily clapped her hands, jumping up and down as though her father had just performed magic, shouting, "Daddy fixes everything," which made the woman glance at Daniel with something almost like admiration, something he wasn't used to receiving, and for a moment, in the golden wash of the setting sun, the three of them stood there, a single dad, his daughter, and a stranger with eyes full of secrets. And Daniel felt as though fate itself had rolled a dice that landed in his favor for the first time in a very long time, though he had no idea just how much this encounter would change his life forever, because to him, she was just a woman with a broken motorbike, but to her, he was the answer to a question she hadn't dared ask the world in years, the question of whether love, real love, untainted by money, status, or greed, could still exist, and though she tucked her gratitude behind a polite smile and offered to pay him, Daniel shook his head, saying, "Just glad I could help, because money was never the reason he fixed things." It was the act of seeing something broken work again that gave him meaning, and as she lingered, helmet in hand, the wind tugging at her hair, Lily tugged Daniel's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, she looks like a princess," and though Daniel chuckled at his daughter's innocent imagination, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this woman was more than she appeared, and as she finally revved her bike and prepared to leave, she glanced back at him one last time, her eyes locking with his in a way that felt like a promise, and then she was gone, the sound of her engine fading into the horizon, leaving behind only dust, questions, and the faint smell of gasoline in the evening air, and Daniel, carrying Lily back toward the porch, didn't know that the woman he had just helped wasn't just any traveler, but a billionaire in disguise searching for something that all her wealth could never buy, and that his kindness, his simplicity, and his refusal to take anything in return had just set in motion a story greater than either of them could imagine, one that would test their hearts, heal their wounds, and remind everyone watching that love can be found in the most unexpected places. So if you're as curious as Daniel about what comes next, stay with us, because this story is only beginning, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter of this journey where a single dad, a little girl, and a billionaire searching for love collide in ways that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. The following week passed quietly in Daniel's small corner of the world, the kind of quiet that comes with routine, early mornings spent packing Lily's school lunch, long days at the auto shop where the smell of oil and metal clung to his clothes, and evenings of simple dinners eaten on the farmhouse porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. But even amidst that familiar rhythm, Daniel found his thoughts straying, again and again, to the woman on the motorbike, the mysterious stranger whose laughter had lingered in his ears like music long after she'd vanished into the road, and though he tried to push her image aside, telling himself she was just a passing traveler he would never see again, fate had already written a different story, for on a Thursday afternoon, as clouds gathered in the sky and rain threatened to fall, a sleek black car rolled up to the auto shop where Daniel was working beneath the hood of a truck, its engine purring far too smoothly for anyone local, and when the door opened, out stepped the woman, no helmet this time, no motorbike, just herself, dressed elegantly yet modestly, as though she wanted to hide but couldn't quite dim the natural grace that seemed to radiate from her, and Daniel froze, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag as she walked toward him with that same faint smile, her eyes carrying the weight of unspoken truths, and she said softly, "I never got to thank you properly," handing him a small basket of food, homemade by the looks of it, bread still warm, jam sealed in a jar, and his heart stumbled because strangers didn't just show up like this in his life, much less ones who looked like her, and he muttered a quiet thank you, trying to ignore the way his co-workers at the shop were staring, whispering among themselves, because it wasn't every day that a woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine walked into their greasy little repair yard, and over the next hour she lingered, asking about engines, about the town, about Lily when she spotted a drawing tacked to the wall of the shop with Daniel's name signed clumsily at the bottom, and the way she listened, truly listened to his words made Daniel uneasy and comforted all at once, for he wasn't used to anyone seeing past the rough edges of his life, but she did, and when she left again, promising she'd be back, something inside Daniel shifted, a cautious hope flickering to life, though he still had no idea that the woman he was slowly letting into his world was worth billions, the heiress to a business empire she had abandoned to find something real, something untainted by wealth or ulterior motives, and for her, Daniel was the answer she hadn't known she was seeking, because here was a man who fixed engines not for money but for pride in his craft, who raised his daughter with tenderness despite hardship, who didn't flinch when life got cruel, and so she returned again, and again, each time weaving herself a little more into Daniel's days. Sharing stories over cups of coffee in his kitchen, laughing with Lily in the yard as they picked wildflowers, even sitting beside him on the porch as the cicadas sang at night, and the more time they spent together, the more Daniel saw glimpses of her heart, how she cherished small things, how her smile sometimes faltered when she thought no one was watching, how she seemed almost relieved to be in a place where nobody asked for her last name, her money, her connections, just her presence, and still Daniel didn't ask questions, didn't pry, because he believed in taking people as they came, though he did wonder at times why a woman like her would choose to linger in the life of a single father with nothing to his name but an old farmhouse and a pair of work-worn hands. And then came the day when the truth could no longer be hidden, when Daniel and Lily were invited, at her insistence, to a charity gala in the city, and though Daniel resisted, uncomfortable with the idea of suits and ballrooms, she insisted gently, promising it was important, and for the sake of Lily's wide-eyed excitement, he agreed, borrowing a suit that fit poorly and combing his hair until he barely recognized himself in the mirror. And when they arrived at the grand hall, the sight was unlike anything Daniel had ever known. Crystal chandeliers, tables laden with food he couldn't name, people dressed in gowns worth more than his entire year's wages, and in the center of it all, the woman, no longer just the stranger with the broken motorbike, but introduced with a flourish by the host as Isabella Sterling, heiress to the Sterling fortune, and Daniel's world tilted because suddenly everything made sense, the car, the grace, the way she carried herself. But it also shattered him, because men like him didn't belong in the worlds of women like her, and his first instinct was to grab Lily's hand and leave, but Isabella found him, her eyes pleading as she whispered, "Please don't go, Daniel, I didn't want you to know this way," and he, torn between pride and the fragile feelings that had taken root in his chest, muttered, "You should have told me," but Lily, innocent and wise beyond her years, tugged his sleeve and said, "Daddy, she's still the same princess," and in that moment, something inside Daniel cracked, because he realized Lily saw the truth clearer than he did, that Isabella wasn't defined by her wealth any more than he was defined by his struggles, and in the days that followed, as Isabella returned again to their farmhouse, sitting barefoot on the porch swing with Lily on her lap and laughter spilling into the night, Daniel began to see what she had been searching for all along. Not admiration, not status, but a family, a place where love was real, unconditional, stripped of all the noise that came with her fortune, and slowly, cautiously, Daniel let down his walls, allowed her to help with repairs, to cook with them, to share in birthdays and small-town fairs. And the bond grew, fragile yet unbreakable, until one evening as the stars burned bright above them, Isabella turned to Daniel, her voice trembling, and said, "All my life I've been surrounded by everything money can buy, but it never gave me what I found here. You, and Lily, and Daniel," his heart pounding, finally took her hand and whispered, "I may not have much, but what I do have is real, and it's yours if you want it." And in that quiet, under the glow of the porch light, they sealed the beginning of something extraordinary. Not a love built on wealth or appearances, but a love forged in kindness, in resilience, in the courage of a single dad who fixed more than just engines, and in the yearning of a billionaire who discovered that love could not be bought but only found. And so their story became a reminder to everyone watching that sometimes the richest lives are built not with money but with love, trust, and second chances. And if you believe in stories where broken roads lead to unexpected miracles, where ordinary people change lives in extraordinary ways, then stay with us, because there are so many more stories like Daniel and Isabella's to be told, stories that can inspire, uplift, and remind us all that love still exists in the most unlikely places. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in the power of love, because the journey doesn't end here. It only begins when you choose to stay part of it.